Happy Saturday to you, fellas. I wasn't going to do a video today, but I was going to actually clip my last live stream because what I'm about to say in this video, I said a lot of it in my very last live stream, which is now a members only video. But I'm going to go ahead and do a brief follow up to my live stream on Thursday. And it's also related to Rollo Tomasi's latest book, The Player's Handbook. The Player's Handbook. I haven't read the whole book, but I have read a minimum of 6 chapters. I've read a minimum of 6 chapters in his book. And I was saying each of those 6 chapters, there's at least 2 or 3 things I just don't agree with. I just flat out don't agree with. And anyway, of the 6 chapters I read, I'm going to cover a minimum of 5 things I philosophically disagree with Rollo Tomasi as it relates to the concept of game. Game as well as the concept of being a player. When it comes to the concept of game in general, and when it comes to the concept of, 3 things I say. My 5 things I'm about to list have mainly to do with 3 things. Stuff related to the definition and concept of game, the definition and concept of seduction, and the definition and concept of being a player. Those are 3 things I'm going to tackle in these 5 things, my 5 philosophical disagreements. I'll start with philosophical disagreement number 5. Number 5. Game, which often includes dishonesty and manipulation, is a mandatory component of seduction. You cannot seduce a woman without some form of game. Now, that was a slightly paraphrased comment. All of my comments from his book are not going to be verbatim. I slightly modified them for effect, but this was, in essence, what he said. So I addressed that one first. That's not 100% true. What he said is not 100% false, but it's not 100% true. See, as you know, for me, there's 2 types of verbal game. First of all, there's 2 types of game. There's nonverbal game and verbal game. An example of nonverbal game would be looks game. Looks game or a sexual reputation game. Looks game or sexual reputation game would be an example of non-verbal game. That would be a clear example of non-verbal game. Then there's 2 types of verbal game, which is direct verbal game and indirect verbal game. Direct verbal game and indirect verbal game. As it relates to Rollo's statement, I would say direct verbal game is a mandatory requirement of seduction. Direct verbal game is a mandatory component of verbal seduction. But indirect verbal game, which includes being dishonest to some degree, disingenuous to some degree, misleading to some degree, and manipulative to some degree, that is not a mandatory requirement. Matter of fact, that's the antithesis of seduction. And see, this is what I had a Patreon live stream earlier today. This is one of the things I talked about, man. Ever since I've been involved in the manosphere, one point of contention I've had with the entire PUA community, conventional PUAs and dating coaches who promote indirect verbal game, is that they try to present dishonesty and manipulation as if it's representative of seduction. That is not true. That is 1000% not true. If you have to resort to being a liar or a disingenuous and misleading manipulator, you are not a seducer. I'm going to tell you just blunt and honest truth. You're not a seducer. Seduction centers around persuasion. Seduction centers around the art of skillful persuasion. Manipulation is not synonymous with seduction. Manipulation is manipulation. Manipulation is not the same thing as seduction. I'm going to give you 2 quick examples. Here's the difference between seduction and manipulation. Let's say you met a woman, Tanya, and you let Tanya know you're interested in having sex with her, and even more particularly, casual sex. And let's say her response is, well, I'm not that kind of girl. I wasn't raised to indulge in just short-term non-monogamous casual sex with men. My preference is much for only engaging in sex within the context of a long-term, emotionally profound, strictly monogamous relationship. That's her response, okay? There's one or two ways you can handle that. If you receive that response from a woman, there's one or two ways you can handle that. Well, really, there's actually technically more than two ways, but at minimum, there's two ways you can handle that. One involves seduction, one involves manipulation. Here would be seduction. If you were talking to Tanya, you let her know you want to have sex with her, particularly casual sex, and she told you basically her strong preference is to only indulge in sex with a man within the context of a long-term, romantic, emotionally profound, strictly monogamous relationship. And over the next 5, 10, 15 minutes, you use your persuasive charm, your verbal seduction skills, and your talent for erotic dirty talk to persuade her to see things your way. Basically, to persuade her to go away from that stance, or at least temporarily suspend or suppress that stance so that she gives in to your sexual desires and interests. That's seduction. That's seduction. That doesn't involve lying to a woman, misleading her, manipulating her. You're just persuading her to see things your way. I've done that literally thousands of times. Literally thousands. Either for physical sex, phone sex, or a combination of both. I've done that thousands of times. Where a woman basically came to me, her response to me when I told her I wanted to have sex with her was, essentially, I'm not that kind of girl, and I'm only willing to engage in sex within the context of a long-term romantic relationship. And I persuaded her to look at casual sex in a different light and ultimately agree to engage in casual sex with me. That's seduction. Manipulation would be, let's say you had that same scenario, met Tanya, let her know you want to have sex with her, particularly casual sex, and she said, I'm not that kind of girl, I only engage in sex with a guy who's my long-term boyfriend or fiance or husband. And instead of attempting to seduce her, you play the game of pretending like you're willing to become her next long-term boyfriend. So you say things like, oh, yeah, I have no problem with long-term relationships. I want to take time to get to know you, blah, 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 blah. And you basically proceed over the next few hours, next few days, next few weeks to give this woman a misleading impression that you're open to becoming her next long-term boyfriend or even possibly her future fiance and husband. See, that's manipulation, man. That has nothing to do with seduction. That has nothing to do with seduction. That's manipulation. You're making her believe that she's going to experience a result that you have no real intentions of having her experience. You're giving her the misleading impression that she's going to become your next long-term girlfriend and you're going to become her next long-term boyfriend, when in reality, once you fuck her 3, 4, 5 times, you know for a fact you're going to leave her alone and go ghost on her. That's manipulation, man. That's not seduction. That is not fucking seduction. That is not seduction. Now, quite frankly, man, I'm sick of all these fucking no balls, no backbone, quote me on all this shit, no balls, no backbone, conventional PUAs presenting manipulation as if it's synonymous with seduction. No, it's not. It's a coward's way to get in a woman's pants. Quote me on that 10 times. Manipulation is a verbal coward's way of getting in a woman's pants. It's a punk's way of getting in a woman's pants. You can quote that to anybody you know who's a PUA daddy coach. Tell them I said it. Tell them I said it. It's a punk's way of getting women in bed. Now, let's move on to my philosophical disagreement with Rollo number 4. Philosophical disagreement with Rollo number 4. For average looking or less than average looking guys, indirect verbal game is far better than direct verbal game. Only men who are above average in physical appearance can be successful getting women in bed with direct verbal game. Now, that's an old trope by my haters and critics. If you remember one of my most popular videos, I did a video called The Top 5 Dumbest and Most Highly Invalid Arguments Against My Mode 1 Approach. If you remember, that was dumb argument number 4. That was dumb argument number 4. And it's false. That is false. It is being good looking is not an absolute requirement to making direct verbal game such as my mode 1 approach work for you. Now, being good looking never hurts you. So there's never a situation where being good looking hurts you. But I would never say that being above average looking is a mandatory requirement for benefiting from direct verbal game. I've known a lot, starting with my college years, in my 20s up until now. I've known a number of guys who are what I would call average looking that have made mode 1 work for them. I've known a number of average looking guys. So looks is not the number one mandatory prerequisite for executing direct verbal game, aka mode 1. I'll tell you the number one requirement. If I had to select the number one requirement, you gotta have a strong ego. You gotta be really egotistically secure, and you gotta have thick skin. In other words, you can't have a fragile ego and try to use direct verbal game with women. If you're a man who has a fragile ego, mode 1 is never going to benefit you. I can tell you that right now, straight up. If you're a man with a fragile ego or emotionally sensitive thin skin, in other words, you can't handle being harshly criticized by women, insulted by women, receiving just adverse negative responses from women, you have emotionally sensitive thin skin, mode 1 or direct verbal game will never benefit you. That's the number one mandatory requirement, more so than looks. Is you gotta have, put it another way, you gotta have balls and backbone, man. Balls and backbone is the number one mandatory requirement for executing a mode 1 approach. You gotta have balls and backbone, man. And you gotta be prepared to handle, part of having strong backbone is you gotta be prepared to handle abrupt and harsh criticisms. Abrupt and harsh rejections and harsh criticisms and insults. If you can't handle that, man, then that's when you're going to have to rely on indirect verbal game. If you've got an insecure, fragile ego, or you got emotionally sensitive, thin skin, direct verbal game is never going to benefit you. Mark my words on that. And if I had to add on one more, for the most part, you got to have a persuasively charming, smooth, and seductive mouthpiece. That's the second most thing that I would say is a mandatory requirement for making mode 1 benefit you the most, is you got to have a persuasively charming, smooth, and seductive. I would say your mouthpiece is more important than your looks between the two. In general, I think both of those are important, looks and mouthpiece. But between the two, mouthpiece is more important than your looks, man. If you want to use mode 1 to seduce wholesome pretenders and erotic hypocrites, you got to have a persuasively charming, charismatic, smooth, and seductive mouthpiece. Now, if you're using mode 1 to identify and weed out manipulative time wasters, you don't even need that. You don't need a mouthpiece for that purpose. You just need balls and backbone. You just need balls. The minimum thing you need for mode 1 is balls and backbone. And specifically for identifying and seducing wholesome pretenders and erotic hypocrites, you need a persuasively charming, charismatic, smooth, and seductive mouthpiece. At best, I would rank looks third. I would say looks is the third most thing you need for mode 1 to benefit you and direct verbal game in general to benefit you. I would rank looks third. Number 1, balls, backbone. Number 2, mouthpiece. Number 3, looks. Now, moving on to philosophical disagreement number 3 from Rollo's new book about being a player. By definition, direct verbal game kills a woman's sense of curiosity, mystery, and intrigue in a man. Direct verbal game is anti-seduction because it prevents a woman from developing an emotional connection with a man and it kills a woman's hope and fantasy that she has a chance at becoming your next long-term girlfriend or future wife. No. And I discussed this in my Patreon exclusive live stream this morning. That is 1,000% bullshit. I'm telling you straight up. That's 1,000%. I would say, if anything, it's just the opposite. In my experience, I can only speak from my experience. In my experience, it's just the opposite. Rollo says that when you use direct verbal game, it kills a woman's sense of curiosity and intrigue in you. No. That ain't been my experience. And I would say that hasn't been the experience of a lot of my clients. When I'm mode one, particularly when I'm mode one hardcore with women, I've had a lot of women, one of their first comments will usually be, "You are an intriguing man. Your sense of verbal boldness has me so curious." Remember the story? I'm not going to go into all the details, but there's a story I've told on a few videos about when I was in California, and I was mode one hardcore with this woman who was kind of a pretentious, prudish, snob type. And at first she went off on me. And then about 45 minutes later, she ended up asking me to walk her to her SUV. And she ended up ultimately performing oral sex on me. While we were walking to her SUV, she's a classic example of what I'm talking about. That's half the reason why she wanted me to walk her to her SUV. She said that my verbally bold and verbally direct behavior left her curious and intrigued. That's exactly what she told me. That my verbally bold, brash, and verbally direct approach with her left her curious and intrigued. Because she said most men don't act like that. That's why mode one, the verbal boldness of mode one tends to leave a lot of women curious and intrigued. Because they're not used to that. Most men are not verbally bold. They're punks. They're verbal cowards. Women are used to men engaging them in conventional conversation, basic, harmless, non-threatening conventional conversation. That don't leave no woman intrigued about you when you a basic conventional motherfucker. I mean, real talk. When you a basic conventional, no balls, no backbone, non-threatening type dude, you ain't gonna leave no woman truly curious and intrigued about you. But when you're bold than a motherfucker like I am, you're going to leave a lot of women curious and intrigued. Again, man, I would say probably 4 out of every 5 women that I've been mode one with, and more so mode one hardcore with, told me in one way or another that it left them feeling curious and intrigued about me. Because again, the main reason they said because they just weren't accustomed to a guy being that verbally bold with them. So what Rollo said is, but man, that's total bullshit, man. It's total bullshit. And again, seduction and manipulation are apples and oranges. They're not the same thing. There's a big difference between seducing a woman into bed and manipulating a woman into bed. Always keep that in mind. Now I'll move on to philosophical disagreement number 2 in Rollo's new Player's Handbook. Remember, women don't decide to engage in sexual relations with a man in the first 5 minutes of their very first conversation with a man, but they do decide in 5 minutes or less if they are not interested in engaging in sexual relations with a man. Again, that's not 100% true. Here's what I would say. The second part of what Rollo said in that statement is true and valid, that many women will decide within the first 5 minutes if they're not interested in having sex with you. So that part of his statement is actually true and valid. But the first part of his statement is totally false, where he says that no woman makes a decision to have sex with a guy in 5 minutes or less. Totally not true. 1,000% not true. At least I'm basing it on my experiences and observations in life. I've gotten women's pussy wet in 5 minutes or less. Both over the phone and in person. I've gotten women's pussies wet within 5 minutes or less. Sometimes within 2 minutes or less. And I'm not even exaggerating. I can name times where within 90 seconds or less after I met a woman, I had a woman tell me that I had her pussy wet. And that basically she was ready to fuck. So that's not true. Here's what I've always said about women as far as, I did a video just about within a week or two ago about this very subject, about the quick decisions women make regarding sex and the slow decisions made. Without rehashing that whole video, here it is in a nutshell. When it comes to men that women are willing to indulge in casual sex with for free, without that man spending money on them, the men that women are willing to engage in short-term, non-monogamous casual sex with for free, that's the quickest decision a woman will make. The average is 15 minutes or less. Most women know whether or not they want to have casual sex with a guy for free in 15 minutes or less after they meet him. The second category women will decide is if they want to have casual sex with a guy in exchange for money or material possessions. That usually takes a woman an hour or less after they meet a guy. Is decide if they're willing to have casual sex with a guy in exchange for money and material possessions. Yeah. Now, I wouldn't say always an hour, but it can be as quick as an hour or less. Sometimes that could take 2 or 3 dates before a woman decides that. But I would say that's the second quickest decision a woman's going to make. Third decision a woman's going to make is if she would enter into a long-term relationship with you in exchange for money, material possessions, and an upgrade in her quality of life. That's going to take a woman a few weeks, usually. I'd say a month or less. Next decision a woman's going to make is if she's willing to have sex with a man, have sex within the context of a long-term relationship with a man for free, without that man spending a significant amount of money on her. In other words, she's bringing just as much money to the table as the guy. That's going to be her longest decision. That's going to be her long. So out of the 4 possible sex partners that a woman will engage in sex with, there's generally 4 types of sex partners a woman will engage in. Casual sex for free, casual sex in exchange for money and material possessions, long-term relationship sex in exchange for money and material possessions and an upgrade in her lifestyle, and long-term relationship sex for free. The quickest decision a woman's going to make is the guys who she would engage in casual sex for free. Again, I've said this a million times, studies and surveys have proven this. This is not just my own opinion. This is based on my conversations with women as well as other independent studies and surveys have proven this. Women know within 15 minutes or less after they meet you if they would engage in casual sex with you for free. So based on that, Rollo's assertion is not 100% valid. It's just not. Again, I've gotten women's pussies wet as quickly as the first 90 seconds after I met a woman. And usually no later than roughly the 5-minute mark, I've had women tell me that I had their pussy wet. Because I have excellent verbal seduction skills. I have out of this world, top-notch, erotic dirty talk skills. And finally, the number 1 philosophical disagreement I have with something Rollo said in his new player's handbook. Non-monogamous players are inherently evil and manipulative because they are bold and daring enough to place their mating strategy above the mating strategies of women, which will ultimately result in the women being left heartbroken when the sexual relationship ends. Bullshit. Bullshit. That's bullshit. Again, that's 2,000% bullshit, man. Rollo does not know what a true player is. And that's my biggest justification for saying he should have never written this book. He don't know what a true player is. At least compared to where I come from, my upbringing, the guys I hung around, how he, man, again, in simple terms, man, if you have to resort to being a liar or a disingenuous and misleading manipulator with women, you're not a player, man. You're not. I tweeted about that. You can go on my Twitter page. I tweeted about that yesterday. You're not a player, man, if you got to resort to being a liar and or a manipulator. That is not a player, man. That's simply what's called a lying, unethical womanizer. What a lot of women call dogs and pigs. That's what that is. That ain't no true player or a ladies' man. Here's what the definition, a true player or a true ladies' man is a guy that has a skillful knack and talent for getting multiple women in bed, even though all the women he's fucking know for 100% fact that he's never ever going to remain faithfully monogamous to them. Drops mic. That's a true player. Put in simple terms, if you got, say, 5 different fuck buddies, and all 5 of your fuck buddies know that you're fucking other women other than them, and they're cool with that, that's when you're a player. That's what's known among people I know as a true player or a ladies' man. Or some people call it a Mac. A Mac. Is when you got 5 fuck buddies and all 5 of your fuck buddies know before they have sex with you and after they have sex with you, they know that you're fucking other women in addition to them. If you got 5 fuck buddies and all 5 of your sexual lovers in their minds believe that they either are your girlfriend or they believe they're on the verge of becoming your next long-term girlfriend, then you're not a player, man. You're a manipulator. That's not a player. That's simply a manipulator. That's a liar and a manipulator. A cheater. Which I have no respect for, because y'all ain't got no balls, man. Y'all ain't got no balls. Quote me on that shit, man. I'll tell you to your face. You ain't got no balls, man. You ain't got no balls. You're a verbal coward. You're a verbal coward. That's what you are. If you're in that second, if you gotta lie to women and manipulate women and get a bunch of women in bed, you're a verbal coward. You're a liar. You're a manipulator. You're a cheater, adulterer. You ain't a real man to me, man. And I'm being real. You ain't a real man to me. That is nobody's player. You ain't no player if you operate like that. True players, man, they got balls, man. They got strong ass backbone. They got confidence out of this world. They got a mouthpiece that's on an A+ level. Get it? Got it? Good. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to game, and particularly direct verbal game, when it comes to seduction, and when it comes to being a player. The godfather of direct verbal game advice and wisdom. The king of verbal seduction and kinky, erotic dirty talk. The master teacher has spoken. Drops mic.
I have to agree with you on the communication piece, because I actually did take a session with Alan Roger Currie, and he gave me a line that I did not think was going to work, and it worked. And I was like, what the fuck?
Oh my God, man, he's the master. He's the master of the verbal seduction. He got that communication piece down pat.
It really worked. Yeah. It just simply worked, and I just didn't think it was going to work at all.
Some guys have natural handles. Some guys have a better natural shot, but you can always improve your shot. And sex is damn sure something you can fucking learn. Look, dude, you want to learn how to talk better? I'm hiring Alan Roger Currie to get my dirty talk game on, because it's always been something I want to get better at.
Verbal seduction, man. I'm like, clearly, this guy's the Michael Jordan of seduction. Like, come on now.